David Cay Johnston, everybody. Hi, David.
Hi there.
David, I see that the court has rebuffed Trump in a couple of different ways. The first thing, that E. Jean Carroll sort of countersuit that he was bringing, they rejected that, it seemed, quickly. But the other, perhaps more important and pertinent ongoing issue with Trump is that he likes to smack talk everybody from the judge to the attorneys that are bringing a case against him to potential witnesses. I wonder if you could speak to the situation the court finds itself in around that issue.
Well, last week, the magistrate who arraigned Trump in Washington, D.C. in the J6 case gave him very clear directives. You're not to commit any more crimes. You're not to do anything that will interfere with witnesses or anyone else. And before the day was out, I believe, Trump was out there saying, you come after me, I'll come after you. And he's since made other menacing posts. But interestingly, they were not named individuals. He didn't say, I'm going to get you, Jack Smith. He wrote critical things about him, and he said terrible things about the judge who is handling that case. But they weren't direct threats. So my guess is that the judge at the hearing, which will be held this week, that she ordered, will see to it that either Trump or his lawyers, if she doesn't demand his appearance, get very clear directives. Trump, of course, has been arguing, as his lawyer, John Lauro, has, that he has a free speech right to say these things. Well, no, you don't. There are limits on your right to speak, and there are times when the government can properly and lawfully, and this goes back to the early days of our republic, inhibit what you can say in public. And trying to interfere with your prosecution through public statements is one of those things. If there's a second, third, or fourth incident, I think we probably have to get to 4. The judge may well, after specifically warning Trump, say, sir, you're remanded. That is putting him behind bars prior to the trial because he is intimidating and threatening people. Any other criminal defendant that I've ever covered, all the way back to the late 60s, who did this, I'm sure would by now be locked up. So Trump is getting a sort of special treatment here. And of course, if you watch, as I have in recent days, Fox and read Breitbart and places like that, this is all an attack by Joe Biden personally to keep Donald Trump from campaigning, which is just absolute utter nonsense with no factual basis. But Fox and Breitbart in those places are not interested in facts. They're interested in telling their audiences what they want to hear.
Sure. This is shadow producer Calvin Wan says Roy Cohn attorney playbook: attack your enemies, admit nothing. It is true. He seems as though it's the hymnal he sings from.
Exactly.
And somebody else, like I say, Eric says 4. And so you said 4. Well, shouldn't take too long. He says,
I think the judge in this case, who is a very tough judge who runs a very move along courtroom, is going to be careful about this. She's going to make sure she has a record that is unassailable if she's going to remand him to custody. And there is some constitutional issue here. I mean, Trump should be able to run for president. He should be able to say, I think the prosecution is unfair. But he shouldn't be able to make menacing comments. That's going to be the key issue in this matter, is menacing. And after all, we've had people as a result of his words who've had to leave their house, like one of the 2 election workers in Georgia. We've had people who've received death threats and threatening phone calls. And we're not talking about people like I am in the public environment. We're talking about people who are just private citizens, in some cases, I believe, volunteers, who have been targeted because of Trump's comments. And judges can properly rein those things in.
Such interesting, unassailable as a ding word, says Tom. That's true. I'm behind on the dings. I get talking to David, and I lose track of where I am on the dings. But ding word, yes. Now, I want to then speak to the Georgia case, David. That's yet another case, and this case is not a federal case, right?
No, Georgia is a state case by the Fulton County District Attorney, Fani Willis. The courthouse has been surrounded with barricades, and there's very heavy security there. And it's expected that, as early as this week, if not next week, that they will be handing up numerous indictments, presumably including Trump, over the effort to overthrow the results of the Georgia election. The importance of that case and the one in Manhattan is that should Trump or a Trump-friendly Republican become president, a presidential pardon would not save Trump from state charges. It would only apply to federal charges. Apparently, the grand jury in Fulton County, or there may be more than one, is hearing from the lieutenant governor. And it may be to fill in to make sure that the grand jurors understand what's going on. But this is a traditional grand jury. They don't need to sit like an investigating grand jury and listen to witness after witness after witness. They can be presented with the findings of the previous grand jury that Georgia has to allow investigations, just as California has civil grand juries to look for incompetence and corruption and waste in local government. And you might put the investigator, the chief investigator, or somebody else on the witness stand, and then you just ask for a true bill, an indictment.
Is there a timing aspect to this, David, that is deliberate on the part of prosecutors? I've been frustrated by the way this whole thing has been slow walked. I thought the Jack Smith appointment was slow walked, et cetera. But now I'm asking you about this timing. Is it strategic?
I don't think so at all. There's no indication that there's coordination here. Fani Willis, apparently, from some public comments she's made, learned a couple of things in the federal indictment over the January 6th insurrection that are the reason she's called back at least one witness, the lieutenant governor, to speak to the grand jury. But there's no indication that they're paying any attention to anything but the criminal cases here, and they should not. There are reasons to be absent from a trial or to get a trial delay. You're in the hospital. You're pregnant and close to delivery. And maybe your child died or your parent died. But running for president of the United States is not on any list anywhere of legitimate reasons to get a trial delay. And furthermore, since Trump insists that there's no case, then you would think he would say, I want you to get to trial just as fast as you can so I can clear my name. Of course, Donald knows perfectly well that it is a solid case, and he is in very deep trouble.
Of all the cases, David, which one stands the greatest chance? Of all these sperm, David, that are swimming up, which one stands the best chance?
The January 6th case in Washington is the most important case. I mean, it's the most important criminal charge brought in the history of the Republic. We've never had a sitting president of the United States try to overthrow the government. We've never had a sitting president of the United States commit a crime that any prosecutor thought after leaving office or while in office was worth going after, with the possible exception of Nixon, and Jerry Ford gave him a full, complete pardon back in 1974. So January 6th is far and away the most important case. Trump is going to fail in his effort to get it moved to West Virginia. The Constitution says you're to be tried in the district where the crime occurred. And the crimes on January 6th and leading up to it did not occur in West Virginia, the whitest state in America. They occurred in D.C. And he's correct that 95% of voters there voted against him. But, so what?
Yeah.
They'll be able to find a jury pool, probably without a great deal of difficulty, in Washington, D.C.
This is interesting. Just to share a couple of thoughts. Deirdre says, I blame this current situation on McConnell. He had the chance to indict him in the second impeachment.
The Republicans on January 7th got it right. Both McConnell and McCarthy went after Trump. And then after having a spine for about 24 hours, they went back to being jellyfish. So
yeah,
now you wanted to talk about the strikes?
Yeah. I had mentioned to David earlier this morning that I wanted to touch on the strikes because I feel as though labor's having a moment in America. There's a 24-hour strike among city workers in Los Angeles. There's a 3-day strike planned for next week in San Jose. There have been big labor disputes. As you know, the aviation pilots got a big increase because of a strike threatened there. The UPS strike, which was threatened and went to the 11th hour, they just averted a strike with them. I wonder if you could speak to, labor's moment in America and how you frame it.
Well, I just reviewed the data on strikes back to the end of World War II. And there's a very clear pattern. There were a consistent number of strikes in this country from 1945 up until 1980. And then they fell away to nothing. In 15 of the 23 years in this century, the share of all working hours that were lost because of strikes was so infinitesimal, it's just an asterisk. It's nothing. And what we're seeing now after 40 years, arguably since 1947, so almost 80 years, but anti-labor legislation from Congress and Reagan administration's very anti-labor positions. And of course, Ronald Reagan is the only union president. He was the head of the Screen Actors Guild to serve as president, but he was viciously anti-union. There was hardly any point in striking from 1981 forward because the whole game was rigged against you. The rules on strikes, the National Labor Relations Board's makeup, was no point. Now you have the most pro-union president in American history, Joe Biden. And combined with that, you have workers who have been held back. If the share of pay going to workers in the economy had remained the same since 1973, workers would have gotten $48 trillion more income over the last half century. $48 trillion, even spread over a half century, that's an enormous amount of money. And so the biggest strike, of course, the one that makes it statistically significant that we're having strikes, is the Screen Actors Guild and the Writers Guild. And that puts all sorts of people out of work. One of my children, who does lyrics for movies, not going to happen for a while. And at the same time, there are real economic issues going on here. San Jose, where two of the unions plan to pull a brief strike. One of the online news organizations there, San Jose Spotlight, told about a zookeeper who makes $27 an hour. That's $56,000 a year. And she lives in her van. And I don't mean some van you make it up. It's a place you can live in, an RV sort of van. Her gross pay is $4,600 a month. The average rent in San Jose for an apartment is $3,300. It's $3,000 in round numbers. San Francisco is $3,300, 10% higher. Well, if your gross pay is $4,600, there's no way you can afford even a $2,000 a month apartment. So there's a real fundamental problem here that we've had years and years and years of not raising wages and eating away at people's wages through things like healthcare used to be on top of your wages. Now it comes out of your paycheck. Pensions used to be on top of your salary or your hourly wage. Now your savings through a 401k, it comes out of that. And we need to have a significant adjustment. The upside, the benefit to all this is, if more people in America have more money to spend and a propensity to spend, that's economic talk for, they're not like billionaires who $1 million a week comes in and they just stuff it in the mattress, buy more stock or more real estate or whatever, but they're going to spend that money. We'll all be better off. There will be increased economic activity. And the Biden administration gets this in a way that even the Obama administration, which was very cautious about these matters, did not. I think I've said on your show before that you can make a plausible case that Barack Obama was what we used to call a liberal Republican when he was in the White House, because he thought that was as much as he could get from Congress. But Biden is all out doing, here's what I said we're going to do. We're going to have all this fixing up of our infrastructure that's making us look like a third world country. We're going to support workers. We're going to enforce worker safety laws. We have a piece at DC Report right now by Jordan Barab, who is the former deputy director of OSHA, about how I think it's American Airlines, but one of the big airlines tried to basically cover up an accidental death of a worker on a runway by trying to call it a suicide. And that flew very well under past administrations, especially Trump's administration. That will not fly with the Biden administration and the people it's appointed to the Labor Department.
Such a great points all. I was noting earlier, David, last hour, that just kind of talking about the fact that we were going to be talking more about it, that unionization has really become a public sector thing more than a private sector thing. I was trying to draw a line between mega mergers and these companies that are so massive that they can withstand a labor movement strategy of strike better than in the old days. I wonder if you can speak to that. There's only 6% of workers are unionized in the private sector.
Right. And at the peak, it was around 37%, around 1973. That was the year of highest concentration or density. When 37% of workers belong to unions, 80% of workers benefited. Most famously, example of that is the Los Angeles Times in every job category: janitor, telephone operator, cafeteria worker, as well as journalist, paid by far the highest wages in town, which allowed them to cream the market, and they didn't have to worry about anybody trying to organize a union. But now that we have all these oligopolies, where there's one or two or three players in a market, it's very difficult. And here's the fundamental error I think we made with the unions. In Europe, unions are generally by industry. When that notoriously famous leftist, General Douglas MacArthur, was the American proconsul in Japan. For those who aren't watching Mark and I smile, we both understand that I'm being satiric here. Yeah. He had his staff draw up a constitution for Japan after the emperor acknowledged he was not a living god. And that constitution required unions. And the theory MacArthur had is that workers would be better paid. They would have institutions to stand up for them, to business and to the militaristic interests in Japan. And you were likely to have an enduring, peaceful society. But the unions are by industry. So it isn't that, there's a union at Honda, but not one at Toyota. In America, we have car plants with no unions, and then we have ones with unions. No, it's the whole industry. And if you do this by industry, then you end up with level playing fields. And one last thing, the University of Minnesota did a study around the turn of the century. And they compared 625 companies that were in the same business and roughly the same size over a 30-year period. And half of them, 625 of them, had unions, and half of them did not. And they just compared their economic performance. And the most fascinating finding, and there were lots of findings, was companies went bankrupt at the exact same rate, whether they did or did not have unions. Because if you had a union and paid better, you got better quality workers. And it's a reminder of a business principle we've completely lost sight of, particularly since the beginning of Reaganism. Properly paid workers are free. If you pay too little, your company will be inefficient. It will not maximize profits. And if you pay too much, you're just wasting your money as the owner. And if we would go back to that principle, I think as a fundamental enshrined attitude and value, something, by the way, I was taught by business people when I was a teenager in my early 20s, I think we would be better off as a society. So to have the majority of SAG members don't make the roughly $520 a week they need to qualify for health insurance, while there are studio chiefs making as much as $250 million for a single year, is absurd. And yeah, there's pressure on the streaming services, about how many people will pay for subscriptions and all of that. That's the market. But workers need to get paid decently. And workers legitimately in the acting business are very concerned about this idea that, well, we'll hire you, Mark, for a day to be an actor on this show. We're going to capture your image on the computer, and then we can recreate your image anytime we want as CGI. And I'm sorry, no, that's not going to fly. At least as long as the actors are willing to go on strike over it.
Right. And we had an actor actually on the show who had that very thing happen. He showed up in a video game. His friend called him and said, hey, my son just killed you in a video game where you're playing a military officer. And, it's one of those first person. And he had never done that project. He appeared for that company in a different project. So
and fortunately in California, there is a state law that protects your image if you are an entertainment person. And it's been applied to the estates of dead people, John Wayne, Marilyn Monroe, et cetera, to protect their rights. We really need federal protections of the same kind, and probably European Union protections.
Could go on and will go on next time. Thanks, David. So appreciate your work. You can find David on Twitter and across the social universe, also on MSNBC, often CNN, et cetera. David Cay Johnston. Thanks, David.
Don't forget my flu shot. Don't forget to keep up with
flu shot, everybody. Come on. All right. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.